Mm.
I do believe Russia could mount a sizable number of new recruits, but they would perform just like what we're seeing in the field now, not very well. If they're not trained well, equipped well, and given some time to season, and if they are not well led, because we know that the Russians are also hurting for junior leadership, the junior officers that do their work. You know that the Russian military is not a big believer in what we call non-commissioned officers in between, and so their leadership model is putting a strain on the requirement for young officers, which again are not trained in season, and you don't raise a good one in 2 weeks.
Mm.
So there are we know that Russia has more kit. Most of their good kit has already been to the war, and over half of it is destroyed or captured and now being used to fire back at them by the Ukrainians.
Yes.
But the kit that will come next will not be their best kit. And the troops that will come next will not be their best troops. And what we've seen, I sort of have changed my position on this. I believe that offensive is already underway. Now, what's happening out on the battlefield may be shaping and probing. These are words that the Army uses to talk about how they figure out on a battlefield where they're going to apply their force. But they are not doing well. The Newtown Vudahar and that we watched yesterday, several tank columns get literally destroyed by some really innovative tactics used by the Ukrainians with mines and scatterable mines. And then we saw in the same area massive bodies of men running at an objective, and they're not supported by any kind of armored vehicles. This is not going to beat the Ukrainians. It will bloody the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians will not be defeated by that kind of sort of disjointed, less than well led sort of action. So I again, I think I fall in the latter camp. And just one more note
Yeah.
of concern, though, is that we are now seeing in Russia, across from Kharkiv and the northeastern part of Ukraine, several large depots or staging areas being built by the Russians.
Yes.
And that is concerning because if they get out there with a large force and they organize well, which they haven't done yet, and they get some good leadership, which they haven't had yet, and they actually bring a force in of what we're seeing out there, that's going to be concerning
Yeah.
for our Ukrainian
No,
brothers.
no balloons, the Chinese balloons, spy balloons, whatever they turn out to be. How much of a threat do you reckon we are talking about here?
Well, clearly, John, they have a series of satellites that can collect some of this very same data. We're not sure how well their satellites work. Maybe they actually do need to complement their satellites with better views from a lower observation point. It's just unknown at this point. But I think that rather than get concerned terribly about that, we need to be thinking about what happened. And I think there's two lines of logic we need to attack here. The first line of logic is our kit right? Do we have the right detection capabilities to see at distance these kinds of objects so that they don't surprise us?
Yes.
You previously had John Kirby on, and he was talking about how they saw it this time, but apparently blaming the last administration, they didn't see it. But then he said these balloons were flying all over the world. So we should have known they were out there, and we should have been better prepared for them. And we obviously were not prepared for the first one that we eventually shot down after it tracked across the whole country. So I think we need to do an audit trail
Yes.
of, is our North American airspace adequately protected and covered? in order to not be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, so make a use of the of what we've learned rather than maybe overreact and get it out of perspective. The former head of the British Secret Intelligence Service was on my show here just a couple of hours ago, saying exactly that. Let's not get it out of proportion, and making the point that China, for example, their cyber espionage is a much bigger deal. It's a much greater threat.
Well, let me come back to that. I wanted to make one more point on the first question, and
Yes.
that is there's a whole nother line of inquiry we need to make. And that is in the first instance, we allowed this balloon to fly across America. I think it's important that NATO, or not NATO, excuse me, NORAD and US Northcom come to show us the line of when this was detected, who was notified, who was briefed, when decisions were made, when and if did this first get to the White House, etc. We have a policy problem that we need to address here.
Yes.
Again, we should not have been surprised and had this in our airspace, and now we're worried about it hitting Americans on the ground. We should have been dealing with this the first time it entered our airspace, like we did the second one, the third one, and the fourth one. So, first of all, we need to look at that kit. And then, second of all, we need to do some introspection of our U.S. policy establishment, and was it ready? And did it adequately handle this problem in a way that would protect America?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah, I guess
go ahead.
I wonder what sort of threat these balloons potentially pose. I mean, it is a fact, isn't it, General, that in World War II, Japan mounted bombs on aboard balloons, and now there's some talk, with whatever degree of realism, that a balloon could be used to drop a nuclear weapon or mount an attack from an electromagnetic pulse. And what is
John,
your view of that?
So, John, if one of our potential enemies in the world, and there are a few out there that want to do us in the West harm and specifically want to do the United States harm, if they determine that there's an attack vector, meaning an uncovered route into our airspace, they'd be fools not to take advantage of that.
Yes.
It's up to us now to close those gaps. You heard one of the senior most individuals in Northcom say that we have issues with our knowledge of our airspace. And so we need to now fix those issues so that an opponent can't exploit them.